Hey, folks, this is Jesse Cope back with another episode of the American Soul Podcast. Hope y'all are doing well wherever y'all are, whatever part of the day you're in. I sure do appreciate y'all joining me, giving me a little bit of your day and your time. I know y'all have other things that you could be doing. So hopefully, I will try and use your time wisely, and hopefully, we'll get a little something out of it that will help us as individuals and our nation as a whole draw closer to God and Jesus Christ. For those of y'all who continue to share the podcast with others, tell others about it, thank you very much. For those of y'all who continue to pray for me and for the podcast, thank you very, very much. Very grateful for that. And for those of y'all who are new, welcome. Glad you're here. Hope you enjoy it. Hope you get something out of it wherever you are around the world, and hope you come back. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for you, Father, and your Son, Jesus Christ, and your Holy Spirit. Thank you for your love, your mercy, your grace, and your forgiveness. Thank you for all the many blessings you bestowed upon us, both as individuals and as a nation. Forgive us our lack of gratitude. Father, forgive us when we focus on things other than you as our priorities instead of putting you and your kingdom and your righteousness first. Forgive us when we don't follow the commands of your Son, Jesus Christ, when we don't love you with our whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, and we don't love our neighbors as ourselves. Forgive us our unbelief. We do believe. Help us to overcome our unbelief. Thank you for those who are listening. Father, wherever they are, please be with them and their families, mine as well. Guide us, Lord. Protect us. Surround us with your angels. Give us the wisdom to see what you want us to do and the courage to act on it. Help us to help those that have less than we do, Father. Those who are hurting and alone and scared. Those who are sick or injured. Those who have lost loved ones. Please be with them. Comfort them. Help them to feel your presence and your peace. And help us to store up for ourselves treasures in heaven, Father. Please, not here on earth. Treasures where rust can't get to it, moths can't get to it. Help us to put our heart and our treasure there with you. And please bring us home to you and your Son, Jesus Christ, in your timing. And guide America and the nations of all those listening around the world. Father, in your Son's name, we ask and pray these things, and please guide my words, Father. Amen. What'd you spend your time on yesterday, folks? Did you make time for God? Did you make time to read his word? Did you make time to pray? How much time did you give to other things? And if you're married, same question. Are you making up excuses for not having time for God or not having time for your spouse? Because that's really what it is most of the time, folks, for the vast majority of us. Uh, are you saying yes to other things, but not to God, not to your marriage? You have to remember that we're all the example that some people around us are going to get of God and Jesus Christ. I'm going to change up the podcast just for a little bit today. We'll see how this goes. This is out of Fox's Book of the Martyrs. And I think this particular edition, let me see if I can find that real quick. This is a copy out of well, I don't know where, University of Virginia perhaps, but it's Fox's Book of the Martyrs. And this particular edition was printed in Philadelphia by Claxton and Company in 1881. And we're going to read a little bit out of it. And we'll see how long we do this. Today we're going to read about Jerome of Prague. this reformer, who was the companion of Dr. Huss and may be said to be a co-martyr with him, was born at Prague and educated in that university, where he particularly distinguished himself for his great abilities in learning. He likewise visited several other learned seminaries in Europe, particularly the universities of Paris, Heidelberg, Cologne, and Oxford. At the latter place, he became acquainted with the works of, it's Wycliffe, Wycliffe, and being a person of uncommon application, he translated many of them into his native language, having with great pains made himself master of the English tongue. On his return to Prague, he professed himself as an open favorer of Wycliffe, and finding that his doctrines had made considerable progress in Bohemia, and that Huss was the principal promoter of them, he became an assistant to him in the great work of Reformation. On the 4th of April, 1415, Jerome arrived at Constance, about 3 months before the death of Huss. He entered the town privately, and consulting with some of the leaders of his party, whom he found there, was easily convinced he could not be of any service to his friends. Finding that his arrival in Constance was publicly known, and that the council intended to seize him, he thought it most prudent to retire. Accordingly, the next day, he went to Iberling, an imperial town, about, it doesn't say how many miles from Constance, or I can't read it. From this place, he wrote to the emperor and proposed his readiness to appear before the council if he would give him a safe conduct, but this was refused. He then applied to the council, but met with an answer no less unfavorable than that from the emperor. After this, he set out on his return to Bohemia. He had the precaution to take with him a certificate signed by several of the Bohemian nobility, then at Constance testifying that he had used all prudent means in his power to procure a hearing. Jerome, however, did not thus escape. He was seized at Hirsau by an officer belonging to the Duke of Salzburg, who, though unauthorized so to act, made little doubt of obtaining thanks from the council for so acceptable a service. The Duke of Salzburg, having Jerome now in his power, wrote to the council for directions how to proceed. The council, after expressing their obligations to the Duke, desired him to send the prisoner immediately to Constance. The Elector Palatine met him on the way and conducted him into the city, himself riding on horseback with a numerous retinue, who led Jerome in fetters by a long chain, and immediately on his arrival he was committed to a loathsome dungeon. Jerome was treated nearly in the same manner as Huss had been, only that he was much longer confined and shifted from one prison to another. At length, being brought before the council, he desired that he might plead his own cause and exculpate himself, which being refused him, he broke out into the following elegant exclamation: "What barbarity is this? For 340 days have I been confined in a variety of prisons. There is not a misery, there is not a want that I have not experienced. To my enemies you have allowed the fullest scope of accusation. To me you deny the least opportunity of defense. Not an hour will you now indulge me in preparing for my trial. You have swallowed the blackest calumnies against me. You have represented me as a heretic without knowing my doctrine, as an enemy to the faith before you knew what faith I professed, as a persecutor of priests before you could have an opportunity of understanding my sentiments on that head. You are a general council. In your center all this world can communicate of gravity, wisdom, and sanctity. But still you are men, and men are seducible by appearances. The higher your character is for wisdom, the greater ought your care to be not to deviate into folly. The cause I now plead is not my own cause. It is the cause of men. It is the cause of Christians. It is a cause which is to affect the rights of posterity. However, the experiment is to be made in my person. This speech had not the least effect. Jerome was obliged to hear the charge read, which was reduced under the following heads. 1, that he was a derider of the papal dignity. 2, an oppressor of the Pope. 3, an enemy to the cardinals. 4, a persecutor to the prelates. And 5, a hater of the Christian religion. The trial of Jerome was brought on the third day after his accusation, and witnesses were examined in support of the charge. The prisoner was prepared for his defense, which appears almost incredible when we consider he had been 340 days shut up in loathsome prisons, deprived of daylight and almost starved for want of common necessaries. But his spirit soared above these disadvantages, under which a man less animated would have sunk, nor was he more at a loss for quotations from the fathers and ancient authors than if he had been furnished with the finest library. The most bigoted of the assembly were unwilling he should be heard, knowing what effect eloquence is apt to have on the minds of the most prejudiced. At length, however, it was carried by the majority that he should have liberty to proceed in his defense, which he began in such an exalted strain of moving elocution that the heart of obdurate zeal was seen to melt, and the mind of superstition seemed to admit a ray of conviction. He made an admirable distinction between evidence as resting upon facts and as supported by malice and calumny. He laid before the assembly the whole tenor of his life and conduct. He observes that the greatest and most holy men had been known to differ in points of speculation, with a view to distinguish truth, not to keep it concealed. He expressed a noble contempt of all his enemies who would have induced him to retract the cause of virtue and truth. He entered upon a high encomium of Huss and declared that he was ready to follow him in the glorious track of martyrdom. He then touched upon the most defensible doctrines of Wycliffe and concluded with observing that it was far from his intention to advance anything against the state of the Church of God, that it was only against the abuse of the clergy he complained, and that he could not help saying it was certainly impious that the patrimony of the Church, which was originally intended for the purpose of charity and universal benevolence, should be prostituted to the pride of the eye in feasts, foppish vestments, and other reproaches to the name and profession of Christianity. The trial being over, Jerome received the same sentence that had been passed upon his martyred countrymen. In consequence of this, he was, in the usual style of popish affectation, delivered over to the civil power, but as he was a layman, he had not to undergo the ceremony of degradation. They had prepared a cap of paper painted with red devils, which being put upon his head, he said, Our Lord Jesus Christ, when he suffered death for me, a most miserable sinner, did wear a crown of thorns upon his head, and for his sake will I wear this cap. 2 days were allowed him in the hopes that he would recant, in which time the Cardinal of Florence used his utmost endeavors to bring him over, but they all proved ineffectual. Jerome was resolved to seal the doctrine with his blood, and he suffered death with the most distinguished magnanimity. In going to the place of execution, he sung several hymns, and when he came to the spot, which was the same where Huss had been burnt, he knelt down and prayed fervently. He embraced the stake with great cheerfulness, and when they went behind him to set fire to the faggots, he said, Come here, and kindle it before my eyes. For if I had been afraid of it, I had not come to this place. The fire being kindled, he sung a hymn, but was soon interrupted by the flames. And the last words he was heard to say are these: This soul in flames I offer, Christ, to thee. The elegant Pog, a learned gentleman of Florence, secretary to 2 popes and a zealous but liberal Catholic, in a letter to Leonard Arcton, bore ample testimony of the extraordinary powers and virtues of Jerome, whom he emphatically styles a prodigious man. Just one of those names, folks, that we ought to remember more than celebrities or professional athletes, singers, actors, actresses, right? Politician. Jerome of Prague. Wonder how many of us today would be willing to make that sacrifice. I wonder how many of us today would be willing to suffer any real kind of hardships for Christ without changing our doctrine to satisfy men instead of God. So, Medal of Honor. I haven't read one in a while. We're going to read at least one today. This was Edward C. Allworth, World War One. If I can get it to load. Captain at the time, his highest rank was Major. World War One, 60th Infantry, 5th Division, U.S. Army. Medal of Honor action date was 5 November 1918, and the place was Petite, France. I don't know, folks. That's as close as I can get. Citation as follows. While his company was crossing the Meuse River and Canal at a bridgehead opposite Clary-le-Petit, the bridge over the canal was destroyed by shell fire, and Captain Allworth's command became separated, part of it being on the east bank of the canal and the remainder on the west bank. Seeing his advance units making slow headway up the steep slope ahead, the officer mounted the canal bank and called for his men to follow. Plunging in, he swam across the canal under fire from the enemy, followed by his men. Inspiring his men by his example of gallantry, he led them up the slope, joining his hard-pressed platoons in front. By his personal leadership, he forced the enemy back for more than a kilometer, overcoming machine gun nests and capturing 100 prisoners, whose number exceeded that of the men in his command. The exceptional courage and leadership displayed by Captain Allworth made possible the reestablishment of a bridgehead over the canal and the successful advance of other troops. Accredited to Corvallis, Benton County, Oregon, not awarded posthumously. Presented February 9th, 1919. Belmont, France, presented by General John J. Pershing. He was born July 6th, 1895, in Crawford, Clark County, United States, and died June 24th, 1966, in Multnomah, Oregon. Buried at Crystal Lake Masonic Cemetery, PMH 3-736-6, Corvallis, Oregon. And the location of the medal is U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Edward C. Allworth. It's hard to read these, folks, and not think about how many men and women have given so much to keep our country under God and thereby preserve liberty. It's impossible without God and Jesus Christ to preserve liberty. We won't. The farther we go away from Christ, and it doesn't really matter whether it's to leftism, socialism, communism, Nazism, fascism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, even Judaism, the farther we move toward those religions and away from Jesus Christ, away from Scripture, the farther we're going to move away from liberty. Liberty is like this little flag, this anchor over here at this point, and they're tied together. It's impossible to separate them. And so, if you want liberty, you have to move closer to God and Jesus Christ. That's the only way to do it. I just wonder how many of us are willing to offer up again our lives, our bodies, to preserve liberty and for the chance to save more souls for God and Jesus Christ. Bible, what are we reading from today? Got out of order here. Matthew chapter 7, I believe. Yeah. Judging others. Do not judge so that you will not be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged. And by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye, and behold, the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's. Do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Prayer and the golden rule. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds. And to him who knocks it will be opened. Or what man is there among you who, when his son asks for a loaf, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, he will not give him a snake, will he? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give what is good to those who ask him? In everything, therefore, treat people the same way you want them to treat you. For this is the law and the prophets. The narrow and wide gates. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who enter through it. For the gate is small and the way is narrow that leads to life, and there are few who find it. A tree and its fruit. Beware of the false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor figs from thistles, are they? So every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, nor can a bad tree produce good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. So then, you will know them by their fruits. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. The two foundations. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house. And yet it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. When Jesus had finished these words, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one having authority, and not as their scribes. Verse 12, in everything, therefore, treat people the same way you want them to treat you, for this is the law and the prophets. Do we do that? Do we talk about somebody behind their back when they've done something to us? or even when they haven't? Is that how we would want to be treated? Do we wake up each day and treat our spouse the way we want to be treated, for those of us that are married, right? That's your closest neighbor. You think about how you want them to treat you. Do you treat them the same way? If you want them to meet your needs, for example, do you meet theirs? If you want to be their top priority each day, are they yours? Do you treat your children, if you have them, the way that you wanted to be treated as a child? If you're a child, if you're in this case, right, as we all are of somebody, do you treat your parents the way that you want your children someday to treat you? When you're walking down the street, do you treat the people that you see on the street or at work, your coworkers? Is that in the back of your mind when you act? Is treating others the same way you want them to treat you? Verse 16, you will know them by their fruits. Grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor figs from thistles, are they? And verse 20, so then you will know them by their fruits. People know us by the way we act, folks. That's how they know who we really are, is the way that we act. It doesn't matter what we say, it matters what we do. If you tell your kids that you love them each day, but you don't spend any time with them, they know that's not true. If you tell your spouse that they're your top priority each day, but you don't show them with actions each day throughout the day in a positive attitude, right? If you don't treat them as 1 in 7 billion people, they know that that's not true. If you're more interested in your money or your social media or watching sports or working out or watching some show on TV or, again, social media, Instagram reels, YouTube videos, et cetera, X, Facebook, then your spouse knows that you don't really care that much about him. If we tell God that we love him, but we refuse to follow the commandments of the Son, Jesus Christ, not perfectly, right? Because none of us are going to follow those commands perfectly because we're sinners, right? But is that what we strive toward? Is our goal Christ each day? People know. And somebody's always watching, folks. And usually it's more than just God. All right, we got one more little section for today, and we're going to call it a day. We're going to start to read a little bit from a book called History of the Rise, Progress, and Termination of the American Revolution, Mercy Otis Warren, 1805. This is at the very beginning. She wrote this as an address to the inhabitants of the United States. At a period when every manly arm was occupied and every trait of talent or activity engaged, either in the cabinet or in the field, apprehensive that amidst the sudden convulsions, crowded scenes, and rapid changes that flowed in quick succession, many circumstances might escape the more busy and active members of society. I have been induced to improve the leisure Providence had lent, to record as they passed, in the following pages, the new and inexperienced events exhibited in a land previously blessed with peace, liberty, simplicity, and virtue. As circumstances were collected, facts related, and characters drawn many years antecedent to any history since published, relative to the dismemberment of the colonies and to American independence, there are few allusions to any later writers. Connected by nature, friendship, and every social tie with many of the first patriots and most influential characters on the continent, in the habits of confidential and epistolary intercourse with several gentlemen employed abroad in the most distinguished stations, and with others since elevated to the highest grades of rank and distinction, I had the best means of information through a long period that the colonies were in suspense, waiting the operation of foreign courts and the success of their own enterprising spirit. The solemnity that covered every countenance when contemplating the sword uplifted and the horrors of civil war, rushing to habitations not inured to scenes of rapine and misery, even to the quiet cottage where only concord and affection had reigned, stimulated to observation a mind that had not yet yielded to the assertion that all political attentions lay out of the road of female life. It is true that there are certain appropriate duties assigned to each sex, and doubtless it is the more peculiar province of masculine strength not only to repel the bold invader of the rights of his country and of mankind, but in the nervous style of manly eloquence to describe the blood-stained field and relate the story of slaughtered armies. Sensible of this, the trembling heart has recoiled at the magnitude of the undertaking, and the hand often shrunk back from the talk. Yet, recollecting that every domestic enjoyment depends on the unimpaired possession of civil and religious liberty, excuse me, that a concern for the welfare of society ought equally to glow in every human breast, the work was not relinquished. The most interesting circumstances were collected, active characters portrayed, the principles of the times developed, and the changes marked. Nor need it cause a blush to acknowledge a detail was preserved with a view of the transmitting it to the rising youth of my country, some of them in infancy, others in the European world, while the most interesting events lowered over their native land. Conscious that truth has been the guide of my pen and candor, as well as justice, the accompaniment of my wishes through every page, I can say with an ingenious writer, I have used my pen with the liberty of one who neither hopes nor fears, nor has any interest in the success or failure of any party, and who speaks to posterity, perhaps very far remote. The sympathizing heart has looked abroad and wept the many victims of affliction, inevitably such inconsequences of civil feuds, and the concomitant miseries of war, either foreign or domestic. The reverses of life, the instability of the world, have been viewed on the point in both extremes. Their delusory nature and character have been contemplated as becomes the philosopher and the Christian. The one teaches us from the analogies of nature the necessity of changes, decay, and death. The other strengthens the mind to meet them with the rational hope of revival and renovation. Several years have elapsed since the historical tracts, now with diffidence submitted to the public, have been arranged in their present order. Local circumstances, the decline of health, temporary deprivations of sight, the death of the most amiable of children, the shaft flew thrice, and thrice my peace was slain, have sometimes prompted to throw the pen in despair. I draw a veil over the fraught scenes that have pierced my own heart. While the soul was melting inwardly, it has endeavored to support outwardly, with decency and dignity, those accidents which admit of new redress, and to exert that spirit that enables to get the better of those that do. I think we'll stop there for the day, folks. So this is, again, Mercy Otis Warren, History of the Rise, Progress, and Termination of the American Revolution, an address to the inhabitants of the United States. I think this is probably going to turn out to be pretty imperative to us as a nation. You notice that she uses the term civil feud, civil war, describing the American Revolution, because it really was. So the Civil War that most of us think about, that was our second Civil War, not our first. It's also interesting, her paragraph, it is true that there are certain appropriate duties assigned to each sex, and doubtless it is the more peculiar province of masculine strength, not only to repel the bold invader of the rights of his country and of mankind, etc., etc. We've forgotten that today, haven't we? That there are certain appropriate duties assigned to each sex. We've tried to pretend that they're interchangeable. It doesn't work very well. It's not working very well. The other thing is, she talks about conscious, that truth has been the guide of my pen. If people are really interested in the truth, folks, and this is true in secular society, but it's also true inside the church, if we're really interested in truth, eventually that's going to lead us to Jesus Christ. And God's not afraid of us searching, and we shouldn't be afraid of other people searching. We don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to be able to answer every single critic that comes along, right? You just look to God and trust God and seek after him. And if you have people that are really upset by the truth, again, whether you're talking about secular society or inside the church, that's a pretty good indication that they're not interested in the truth. And then one more little comment here. She's talking about it's the philosopher and the Christian, right? Philosophy teaches us from the analogies of nature, change, decay, death. The Christianity strengthens the mind to meet with a rational hope of revival and renovation. We need that hope, folks, desperately. That hope that only Jesus Christ can offer both as individuals and as a nation. If you don't have it, I would strongly suggest you find it. The chances that we have another fight coming in America are pretty strong. And hopefully, as we go through these podcasts, you get some encouragement. You go back and you look at some of these Medal of Honor winners like Allworth. You look at some of the martyrs inside Christianity, right? If you went back and read that commentary about Jerome of Prague again, you'd notice that where he was condemned was not because the very last point had anything to do with Christianity as a whole. It was kind of like an afterthought. Their main concern was that he wasn't following along with the men inside the church, the hierarchy. And that gives you a pretty good indication they weren't really concerned with Jesus Christ or the Christian religion or scripture. Again, searching after truth. God bless y'all. God bless your families. God bless America. God bless your nation wherever you are around the world listening. Sure to appreciate y'all joining us. We'll talk to y'all again real soon. Looking forward to it.